number one, there's no objective right or wrong about if the reverb is right or not. But number two, there's one exception, and it is that you are wrong and you're an idiot and I hate you.
Wow.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl.
How are you doing?
I am doing pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm good. I feel like we're both in a much better mood today than we
Yes.
were last time.
This has been a better week for me than last week.
That's good. Yeah, it was not the least stressful attempt at recording a podcast.
Let's
Last
put
week
it to put it lightly.
Yeah, we'll just leave it
We'll
at
leave
that.
it there. Yeah, put it
Yeah.
mildly. Yep. Totally.
But we survived that episode, and now we are here with a renewed sense of energy and excitement and nerdy deep diviness.
Nerdy deep diviness. If you're in the mood for some nerdy deep diviness, you're in the right place because we got you covered.
Yeah. So last time we deep divinessed into vocal production, and we kind of started getting a little bit into some mixing things. Like I know I was going off on my de-esser rant, but we were still talking about it in solo. Like we were kind of talking about, processing the vocals and the things that we're trying to do with it, but we didn't get into the grander context of how do we make the decisions to get the vocals to sound great in the actual context of the song, and how do we make not just what plugins do we choose and what are we doing like technique wise, but what are the questions we're asking ourselves about the grander, all of the different characters in the song, all the characters in the story. How do we decide what to do with the vocals, why we're doing it, and then how to achieve that? So I want to kick it off by pointing at you across the ocean and saying, Ben, my first question for you: how, if at all, how do you approach mixing lead vocals versus backing vocals? Do you have a preference, like a kind of a go-to approach to that?
Well, I would definitely say that lead vocal there's a lot more thought behind anything happening in a lead vocal than in a backing vocal. Not to say that there isn't thought in a backing vocal, but I don't think I've ever started with backing vocals first. I might do the lead vocal right after doing the drum and the bass, but I'm not doing backing vocals before I start the lead vocals. So yeah, there's definitely a difference in the approach, and I definitely am trying to get a lead vocal to be more present almost always, unless for some reason you want a muffled voice or something, but like you want the voice to be upfront, heard, loud and proud, and hopefully shining. Whereas the backing vocals the thought process is more about supporting the lead vocal and finding its place in the mix, in terms of like balance and stuff. So getting, they might have different effects. They might have similar effects, but just like one has a slightly kind of like a different kind of EQ thing going on, or maybe there's like more reverb than the lead vocal because you want it to sound like it's further back, or who knows? I mean, this is like a very broad question. It's very difficult to kind of give you what I usually do with this, but yeah, lead vocal is definitely front and center of every mix, and making the mix won't ship until I'm really happy with the vocal. So like, if I'm listening back and the S's are not the way I want them, I'm gonna go back in and fix that before we, obviously. Yeah, but lead vocals, I love mixing lead vocals, and I think that's one of the things that people like about my mixes. When like random people will give me feedback about my mixes, like, oh, the vocal is just shining. Like you could tell that like you've put a lot of work into it, and I do. I sculpt I'm all about really sculpting a lead vocal to get exactly what I want out of it, and I'll hear it and I'll know where I want to go, kind of thing. And that's just years of mixing and EQing vocals and compressing vocals and knowing what Sometimes I get down to like a really nitty gritty like level of like if I boost a little bit more top end, it sounds a little less muddy. Choosing the right EQ to do it, and like just like getting that perfect tone. I try not to like compromise on the vocal sound. Like people compromise other instruments so that there's things can kind of everything has its place, right? You don't want masking and stuff. But with the lead vocal, I don't really want compromises. I want it to sound as beautiful and lush and upfront as possible. So That's not to say it will be above the mix, because I don't think my vocals are too loud. I think they sit in the mix nicely, and that also has to do with the separation of the low end and the top end, and the mids or
And
whatever,
the style of music that you're doing too.
and
Like
the
it's
style of
not
music.
like,
Yeah,
vocal
yeah.
pop like
I'm not
right in
into
front of your
that. Yeah,
face.
I don't. That doesn't happen very much in the music I'm mixing. Like the vocals just like way too loud. That's not very common. But yeah, but I would say that like because there's like the lead vocal is mostly mid range and top end. I mean, whatever. It's everything, but it's not. It doesn't have a lot of low end. So there's always the low end to kind of fill out things. So for me, that's like the secret of getting a vocal in the mix sitting nice. I mean, I don't know if I think about it so much, but when I'm actually mixing, but like the vocal will sound really loud, but it won't dominate the mix if there's enough low end stuff happening. So it's just kind of, it's like a puzzle. I don't know. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm blabbering now. What about
No,
you? What about you,
well,
Carl?
so
Should we keep going on the lead vocal, or do you want to kind of differentiate between the lead vocal and the backing vocals?
I was gonna say I can't separate them
Huh?
because the backing vocals to me, like the backing vocals, because
Carl,
of
you're
being
always coming out of left field here with
I
something.
know, but like
I love it. No,
because
and like, every time you say something and it makes me think a little differently and it improves my workflow. So like
oh,
that,
awesome.
yeah, totally.
Okay, so here's my thought on it. It's that, the if the backing vocals are always going to be intended to support, they're not always intended to support because there are going to be some times where the backing vocal is meant to be a supporting texture and like extra body to it, and there are going to be some times where it's meant to be like to feel like an explosion. Right, and you want like because there's sometimes where you want the harmonies and the backing vocals and the doubles to be tucked away, and maybe, like, you're kinda softening the top end, you're softening the transients, you're getting, really being more, uh, cautious with the S's because, like, even have them maybe tucked in a little bit because you don't want them to distract from the lead vocal, you just want them to, like, be felt. Then other times, you want it to feel like a Muse song or, like, something or Queen where it's just, like, in your face, like the whole like every part of the spectrum is just like this big wall of vocals. So to me, I can't really separate it because I feel like everything I do with the backing vocals has to be following and like filling the right role that it needs to in that moment of the song. But to be able to do that, I need to always know what the lead vocal is doing, and I need to make sure that they're working together to create that balance, because there is no like, if without backing vocals, there is no lead, you know what I mean? If you wanna think of it kind of maybe it's kind of a little bit, heady to think about, but,
Right.
like,
I mean,
for
yeah, there could be
yeah,
just a vocalist.
yeah, so, like what I try to think of, it's like, "Okay, well, what do I need to do in this moment?" And if I want the backing vocals to be a support, then that's gonna also change maybe what I do to the lead vocal, because I'm not gonna need as much usually not gonna need as much effect on it, like as many like, reverbs and delays and things if that extra texture and support is coming from backing vocals. And if there's
Mm,
a so if there's not a lot of backing vocals, maybe I do need to, get some of that texture and movement and that little like, modulation, variation, kinda textural stuff. Maybe I do need to get that from the way that I process the lead.
right.
So, like, in a way, like, the more prominent the backing vocals are meant to be in that part of the song, the less I need to do to the lead vocal because then it's just gonna be adding a ton of, like, mud and not just, like, EQ mud in the EQ sense, but just, like, stuff that is happening, the reverb tails, the delays that are just kind of tripping over the backing vocals, and all of a sudden now it's kind of I'm taking up too much space with not the lead vocal itself, but the effects that the lead vocal has added onto it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. And I would say I just kind of do things inversely. Like I would probably just make sure that the lead vocal is super splendid, and then I'll add in the backing vocals and see what that does to it. And then if it is too messy, then I will dip things out. I'll take
Mhm.
I'll maybe I'll scale back some of those reverbs, or maybe I won't put any reverb on the backing vocal because it's just like textural. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like chasing your tail. You know what I mean? You could go either way, and then you're gonna just like mess around until it suits your, what
Yeah.
you're listening for, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there are definitely tracks where it's a big gestalt of vocals, and that's like a big part of the sound, and then in which case, like I might do harmonies at a similar time to the lead vocal, you know what I mean? And I might like do a lot of tweaks in tandem with just soloing the lead vocals and the harmonies. I know you're not supposed to solo anything while you mix, but sometimes you do that.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I don't know. Do you solo your lead vocals when you're mixing them?
Um, so yes, but it's less when I'm actually making mixing decisions and like it's more when I'm fixing problems. It's more when I'm
Yeah,
like searching for an issue. Like I hear there's something weird happening, like there's some sort of frequency buildup in the reverb. Like especially if there are, let's say that I get a track and it has like a double and a triple in the chorus. Like it's meant to be like a big thick, but they're all sung in unison. And maybe the person that like the producer that sent it to me maybe went a little more aggressive and tight with the tuning that I would have probably preferred in this situation. I like having my like doubles and triples like a little bit looser. Because what happens if they're all too close, then you have three different vocal tracks all hitting the same like really narrow like frequency window all at the same time. And then if that note is also being played by a synth or a guitar or piano or something, then it's like you get these spikes in that little particular, frequency range. And like the less tight the vocal is, the wider that is, and therefore like the it's more of a hill and less of a mountain peak, if that makes
mm,
sense.
yeah,
So it's usually when I'm soloing a vocal in the mix, it's usually because like I'm hearing something weird and I'm trying to figure out, well, which of the vocals is like adding to that problem, and then
yeah,
how can I isolate it,
yeah,
rather than making like character building sonic decisions on it. It's usually when I'm like in uh detective mode trying to figure out what's
yeah,
making that thing happen that I don't like.
yeah. Do you have what's your thought process in terms of like balancing a lead vocal? Is there any thought to it? Do you like your vocals loud?
Yeah.
What is it? What is that like? What's going on in your brain when you're like just throwing up the vocal and you're playing it against the rest of the track?
I I like it. I generally like it on the louder side, but I generally am not one to have the vocals be like right here up in your face. And if you're listening to this and you're not watching it, I just imagine me putting my hand half an inch away from your eyeballs, because that's how some like vocal mixes feel.
I feel
And
very
there's
uncomfortable right now,
yeah,
Carl.
there's good. That's the goal. You haven't said that to me in a couple of weeks, and I feel like
You've been playing it too safe,
I've been
Carl.
playing it too safe. Um, and there's something against those kind of vocals when the style, calls for it. I just am usually working on stuff that is a little bit left of center. So like I want the vocals to be prominent and heard, but not in there's like some styles of pop. There's like some artists in pop where like the vocal is the only thing that they really care about. And that's cool. That's their thing. That's usually not the kind of artist that I'm working with where they do really like all of the instrumental textures and things. So it's finding that balance of keeping the vocals pop enough, on top enough without it feeling like it's just kind of aggressively placed in front of everything else. So one of the things that I do that enables me to do that to keep the volume of the vocals feeling loud without it actually being loud and without it, you know, pushing down all the instrumentals every time that it hits the limiter. I'm just very, very cautious and thoughtful about what's happening in the top end of all of the other tracks. So I know we talked about this, I think, probably a couple months ago, but how everybody talks about, oh yeah, you want to remove the sub frequencies of instruments that you don't need. Like there's no need for 30 hertz in a hi hat track. Generally speaking, there's no need for 30 hertz in a flute part if it's like in the background or whatever. and
or ever.
or ever, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, it could maybe it's like a contrabass flute, like
Like,
I don't want to make orchestral,
one out of 2 million tracks has 30 hertz in the flute,
yeah,
mattering.
maybe actually that's probably an overestimation of how frequent maybe that would be. But I guess like, but I look at the top end the same way. Like there are a lot of instruments that don't need 15K. They just don't, like a lot of guitars, especially, and the stuff that I'm doing. I a lot of times will have a low pass filter on the guitars that there's rarely anything above like 7 or 8K, just because we don't need it. And
You're talking about
even
electric guitars, though, right?
electric guitars, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Acoustic guitar is usually a little bit higher, but even then, there's usually some stuff that's like at the very, very top that is just string noise and like
Yeah.
squeaks and like hiss that are not
Hmm.
actually musical. And I think that's it. It's not getting rid of high frequencies because you're supposed to get rid of high frequencies. It's just like getting rid of the non-musical consequences of it being an instrument. So whether it's in the bottom end, and it's like I know we talked, I think it was last week, we talked about the um like sub frequencies in a hi-hat part, like in a live hi-hat. And it's not because that's what the cymbal sounds like, it's because it's the physical manifestation of you hitting the hi-hats with the stick. That physical vibration is going traveling through the stand down to the floor, up the microphone stand, and just shaking the microphone capsule at 20 hertz or whatever. Like that is not musical, so I'm getting rid of it. And I think there's a lot of things in synth parts, in loops, especially when you get any kind of like drum loops or drum samples that are just so overhyped. There's a lot of information that is just not actually musically necessary. So rather than having to push the volume up on the lead vocals or adding a bunch of top end on the lead vocals, if I'm just cautious about what's going on in the top end of everything else, I'm able to just kind of carve out that space, kind of like you were saying in the bottom end, carving out all of that unnecessary low end of the vocal and having the instrumental kind of fill that out. This is the inverse on the top end where I'm carving out that unnecessary, unmusical stuff out of the instrumental so that all of that air and the clarity of the lead vocal is what is shining. And that's why, going back to the backing vocals and the decisions that I make in the backing vocals based on what the lead's doing and what the backing vocals are supposed to be doing underneath it, it's a question of do I, are in I ask this kind of like section by section, but like in this moment at least, are these backing vocals meant to be are they meant to be felt or heard? And if they're meant to be felt, I'm probably going to also do a low pass on the backing vocals because I don't necessarily want a bunch of air. I don't want really prominent S's. I'm probably going to use something like um I usually use the Eventide Omnipressor on my backing vocal buses because it has it's like an upward compressor as well. But what I've found is that if I adjust the attack time to be as short as possible, it really doesn't let like transients come through. Like it really does a great job of just cutting them off. So what I'll do is I'll either have it as short as I can when I don't want transients to come through and I want it to feel a little bit softened as far as the punch goes,
Yeah.
but then if I want them to be more prominent and I want them to be like more heard, I won't do the low pass filter. I'll probably adjust the attack time to like 10 milliseconds or something just to like exaggerate the entrances and exaggerate the transients of those backing vocals so that way they actually poke through just a little bit more.
Mm.
I might make it for that section, I might make the vocals, all the way wide, but if I want it to be felt not heard, I might only make them like halfway out to
Yeah.
the side.
Yeah.
So it's not just a volume thing of like how loud should they be relative to the lead
Yeah.
vocal. That's like, well, thinking of it three-dimensionally, how loud should it be? How deep should it be? How high, like frequency range should it go? How wide should it be? How punchy should it be? So, because I found like just having reverb on it, like doesn't always do the trick. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're adding reverb, you're adding space, but you're not actually removing the things that are potentially causing the distractions in the first place, like the
Yeah.
transients and the S's and the air and the breaths and like the entrances.
Yeah. That's great. I love that compressor trick. And yeah, I definitely I would say maybe I lean a little more on EQ than on compression in terms of getting a vocal to sort of fit where I want it to be. But, obviously also using compression. And yeah, also I totally relate to what you're talking about, like the width of the vocal. Like I do a lot of my panning for vocals are all over the place, and they're very often all the way wide, and they're very often really tight and in the middle. And it sort of just really depends what you want to get out of the vocal. And like if you want wide, lush, big vocals like Bohemian Rhapsody, they're probably wide panned, and I'll go all the way left and right and do stuff like that. And if it's something that just wants to, it's more of a texture, it's just underneath it, supporting it, then it might be like, like 10 to the side or something, like with like the Logic panner. Maybe 10, 12, I don't know. Yeah, so it totally depends. All this stuff so depends on everything else, but yeah,
Yeah,
the
so I guess
panning thing is huge.
so that's where I want to poke you a bit. And like, yes, I agree, it all depends. So like, but instead of us just saying like, well, it depends.
Well, I'm saying that you're being very coherent, and I'm just saying it depends.
I was trying not to throw you under the bus, Ben.
You just throw me under the stereo bus, but
God.
I'd rather be thrown under the vocal, the all Vox bus. That's the one.
That
that hurt. That hurt.
That was an unforgivable pun.
Unforgivable.
That was pun forgivable. I'm sorry, everybody. You get your money back.
It's just free content. We don't know anything to anybody. They can enjoy this and take what they want from this episode, and they have to just deal with a few terrible
I feel
puns
like we
owe
them a couple IQ points at least. But anyway, but I want to poke you a bit further and say like, so what are some situations like, sometimes it's wide, sometimes it's narrow. So like, sometimes it's louder, sometimes it's softer. So like, what are some examples of, moments in an arrangement where you would want to like push them wider?
That's exactly what I was thinking about as you were framing this question. And usually first verse, there's probably not going to be any harmonies. First chorus, there might be a harmony, and it usually grows as the song goes along. So I would say 9 times out of 10, there's harmonies in the second verse. In which case, it might just be one harmony, right? And then if it's like one little harmony that's just supporting the lead vocal, and you're changing the song up, and you're taking the listener on a journey, that's usually the kind of thing where it's just like one vocal, put it a little bit to the side, tuck it in, find the right balance, find the right like amount of punch or presence versus the lead vocal, as you're saying, and then that's usually pretty simple. But then as the song develops, usually we're doubling harmonies, and we might have like 2 harmonies that are each doubled, for the lead vocal. That would be pretty typical for a song I'm working on, like a third above, a fifth below, or something. I don't know. And then that's like not necessarily the case, but whatever, just an example. And then those could all be panned full out, and then we're in like Bohemian Rhapsody land, and we're making those harmonies sound really loud and proud, compared to the lead vocal. And so it just kind of, as you build the song and you build the momentum, you want to maybe add more panning to your palette, and that can build excitement and make the final chorus, super strong and powerful.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm glad you said that, because that's what I wanted to kind of get into as well, where it's the acknowledgement that the right processing, the right balance, the right contextual choices that you make for a vocal is going to change from moment to moment in the song.
Yeah, and even doubled like lead vocals, or a lead vocal might get doubled in like the first chorus, and then it might get tripled in the third chorus,
Mm-hmm.
And so like those things also change, and then the panning will depend also. Like that could change the panning altogether. Like I could double a lead vocal that's like smack in the middle, or I could pan them out a little bit or all the way, and that kind of also, it just depends on the track, like what's it calling for, and that's just experience and knowing what you like,
Yeah.
But all these things are tools at our our disposal, whatever. What about you, Carl? With like the the evolution of the vocal over time.
Oh,
and the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think same I'm constantly going from like section to section, just asking myself like what needs to be what needs to happen here.
Yes.
And I think like it's weird. Like I think that's why I try to start with the second chorus or the third chorus, kind of depending on how long the song is. And again, I'm working primarily in like pop adjacent styles, so choruses are important, generally speaking. And I usually start towards the end where it's like maybe like the most exciting part of the song, like the highest energy part of the song, and specifically the part that has the most vocals. And usually what I like to do is I like to start there when I'm getting the balances, because if I can get that to feel really good and really big, then I know what I'm aiming for throughout the rest of the song. So then when I go and I kind of work myself backwards, I can make the adjustments to make sure that the things that I'm doing in the third, like in the bridge, are creating the tension to lead up to that chorus. The things that I'm doing at the end of the second chorus and the beginning of the bridge, like that they're creating some contrast and uh some tension and momentum. And then like going back to like the second verse and like how do I always make sure that I'm kind of like growing in like interesting ways
Yeah.
that keeps the listener excited.
Yeah.
So if I and also like generally speaking in a lot of the stuff that I work on, by the time you get to that last chorus, it's kind of like the everything including the kitchen sink has been thrown at that section. So I got to know, all right, like I know what are the important parts are gonna be. I can make sure that I'm, like, prioritizing the parts that are happening more often in the song, like, if there is, like, obviously, like, the bass, the kick drum, like, the things that are gonna be more present, and then that helps me to, from an overall mix standpoint, figure out, well, what are the little textures that are coming in just in that last section, but then from, like, a vocal standpoint, I can kinda see where I'm headed so that I don't get too exciting too fast early in the beginning. So that enables me to make some choices where maybe I am, gradually, sneakily, stepping up the backing vocals throughout the song. Maybe they're getting a little bit brighter throughout the song. Maybe they're getting a
Mm.
little, depending on what I'm going for, but it's maybe I want them to be more prominent in the choruses and less prominent in the verses. Maybe I want them to be not really prominent at all until the bridge, and then when the bridge comes in, it's just like that's the big, wall of vocal moment. But I always have to ask myself, like, what do the vocals need to be doing in this moment? And that's a question I ask myself about any instrument. It's like,
Yeah.
what in this moment, in this scene of the play, who is the lead? Where should the spotlight be? Who should be, adding interested in the background, but not getting in the way and not being distracting. And it's like the scenes change. It's not you don't go to see a play and everybody sits at the exact same place with the exact same prominence. Like that would be the most boring thing to watch ever. And I treat mixing in the same way, whether it's the backing vocals or the lead vocals or any of the instruments. It's always figuring out, well, what can I do to the rest of the song to make the vocals stay prominent when I want them to be prominent? And then what can I do to the rest of the song and to the vocals when I want them to sit back and be part of you know, the the ensemble
Yeah.
rather than taking a lead?
Amazing. So I'm trying to think where we can take this from here. Do we want to talk about like what kind of like effects we do to vocals to help them sit in the mix? Like maybe like things that we're thinking about in terms of like getting a vocal to really be a part of the environment it's in.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, I'm probably gonna say something that you're gonna have to have me explain because it makes sense in my head, but when I first say it, you're gonna be like, "What the hell?" If I want the vocals to stay in the front, I usually don't make any changes to them, and I'm just making changes to the instrumental.
Hmm.
And specifically, I do a lot of side chaining in my mixes. And a lot of utility side chaining that is doing very subtle things, but it's just to help retain the pecking order of the different layers. So I think when I talk to mixing engineers and I say that I use a lot of side chaining, they just kind of assume I'm talking about like Daft Punk or some sort of like really heavily aggressive, oh, when the kick hits, everything else gets silent for a split second. And that's not really what I'm doing. I think for the vocals specifically, I really like using Pro MB. So it's like a multi-band compressor, but I sidechain it to the vocals, and I have that on all of my other like primary buses. Like before it goes to my mix bus, I have vocals, drums, basses, uh, instruments, and the all the effects, all the different effect sends that go there. And I have it on all four of those other ones where I have it that, when the vocal is really digging into that, that range from like 2 to 5K, it's ducking everything else just a little bit. Like I think at most it does like a dB, like
Hmm.
it's not
And this is
super
including on
intense
the drums and the bass. This is
on the drums
everything,
and the bass. Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
But
Because especially,
you're narrowed in on that frequency zone. You're not you're like it's not going to actually affect the punch of the bass.
yeah,
It's
well,
only going to affect the
yeah.
mid range where it might be masking the vocal's presence.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple different bands in it, but it's only because it's separated that way and doing it multi-band, it's only when the vocals are getting really like
Mm.
only when if there's a lead vocal that is like pitch shifted and Foreman shifted down 2 octaves and is meant to be some weird crazy like textural thing and it's so loud, then it would maybe affect a little bit of the kick drum. But usually if I'm doing something like that, realistically, that's probably meant to be such a unique moment in the song that I'm probably muting everything else that's happening anyway. And it's just focusing on like the only thing that you can hear in that little split second is that those 2 notes that is a super affected low octave vocal.
Right.
So it really wouldn't matter anyway. It's
Yeah,
just when
yeah.
there happens to be like, if there's a really big group vocal that comes in and it's really big and full and it's meant to be huge, like in those little situations when it happens to go high enough over the threshold in the like the lower mid range that it does anything to the kick, I'm okay with that because the punch of the kick is not the priority there. The priority is clearly the big wall of vocals at this huge like pinnacle moment of the song. So if my kick drum punch gets reduced by half a dB for that one moment, nobody's going to notice. And if anybody notices it, then like I didn't make the actual vocal moment exciting enough anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that.
but I found that I do the same approach. Like it's why I actually process any sort of like solo, like if there's like a guitar solo in it or like a synth solo or whatever, I process that as a lead vocal because I look at it in the same way where whether
Mm.
it's a lead vocal or it's like a lead instrument, that's the thing that should be in front of everything else.
So that's going. They're all going to the same bus, and that bus is triggering the sidechain and the
Yeah,
multiband
so like
compressor. Got it.
yeah, so there's a guitar solo in the bridge that's actually going to be making all of the other instruments, duck out a little bit when it's going over the threshold for like the upper mid range or for like the
Yeah.
lower mid range, whatever it is. So because I'm treating it like a lead vocal because a lead vocal is to me synonymous with, the sonic priority. What is the narrative priority
Mm-hmm.
from moment
Yeah.
to
The
moment?
storytelling moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and the guitar solo acts as that storytelling moment. That's what, people wouldn't add a guitar solo if they didn't want you to listen to it.
100%.
You know?
No,
So,
for sure. Well, I actually do sometimes guitar solos that are like background guitar solos for like a big chorus where you just want to have a little bit more
yeah,
energy.
yes.
But yeah, but if it's a lead,
Yeah.
but it's not really
Yeah.
a solo. I guess it's just like guitar licks in the background.
Yeah, then it guess yeah, but it's not well, that's the thing, like, it's not a solo then, it's like it's a lead part.
I love how just like talking about lead vocals, we have to talk about everything else in the mix because
Mhm.
it's all part and parcel, right?
Yeah.
You can't divorce the vocal from the mix, and you can't divorce the mix from the vocal. It's all because the mix is supporting the vocal, and the vocal has to sit in the mix. So
Yeah.
they just go together in such a yeah.
Yeah. I think that's, why it's so weird to say it out loud. I don't think I ever really thought about it in this sense, but I think the first few steps of mixing vocals are investigating the instrumental
Hmm.
and making changes to the instrumental, like, before I even really touch the vocal,
Yeah.
which is I mean, it makes sense when you say it out loud, but I don't think I've ever like said that out loud before. I don't think I've ever really thought of it in those terms. But
Yeah,
that's like that has to be the first step, and I think that's the thing that especially online production education and like mixing education kind of skips over.
mm,
It's that initial deep dive into understanding what the context is that you're trying to create and what is the context that you currently have.
yeah,
And then and that is what it informs all of those decisions. And I think it's usually, well, the first step is you're going to, remove any unnecessary low end. Like it's usually like diving into objective,
technicalities. Yeah,
these like supposedly objective technicalities that really aren't like taking into consideration what's actually happening. Because I would even say, when it comes to getting rid of like the super low end, if it's a section of the song where there's 80 other layers happening, which happens a lot in the, alt pop kind of world that I'm in, then yeah, I don't want there to be any extra low end mud that's not musical because there's plenty of other instruments in that section. But let's say that it drops down to a bridge where it's literally just vocal and like a piano or maybe an acoustic guitar or something. Well, then there's nothing else happening in that bottom end, and if I get rid of those, like, sub frequencies from the vocals,
yeah. It
not
sounds
only
empty.
does it sounds empty, but also it doesn't sound as intimate,
Mm,
because if it was just if you are just listening to somebody talk and you're next to them, like, you do feel those vibrations. You do feel that.
yeah,
So, it actually makes it feel more intimate if you're less cautious of what's happening in the bottom end for those moments.
yeah. Well,
But
what
it
I find to do, what I do all the time is just like make duplicate tracks and have like slightly different EQs on them. So like the high pass will be, I'll have a bigger, a high pass that's like cutting a lot more highs or whatever. High pass, yeah. Yeah, like
yeah,
going deeper,
yeah,
or just like finding a frequency that's bothering me in this one specific spot. That's like, it's like not working with the guitar for some reason, or the guitar's not working with the vocal. So like, let's dip out 500 hertz in this one spot, for this like
yeah,
two measures, and then it'll go back to the way it was, the next measure because now it's on a different track. Yeah,
yeah.
it's constantly in motion and moving. And yeah, so something yeah, it's all part and parcel. But one thing I wanted to kind of talk about in terms of like gluing a vocal with the mix is sharing reverbs. And I don't know if this is something that you do, but I tend to like have a few reverbs on a lead vocal. Like I would say two or three reverbs and maybe two delays or something, typically on on a lead vocal. And a lot of other instruments are probably going into some of those reverbs, so not all of them, but like the guitars and the pianos could be going into the same, maybe it's a plate reverb that the vocal is on, and it will mesh them into the same space.
So, like, do you have like one, like, well, I'm just gonna call it bus 50, right?
Yeah, bus
Like,
50,
so
perfect.
bus 50, if you say bus 50 is your plate reverb,
Yeah.
do you have the vocals going to bus 50 and also the guitar going to bus 50 and also that, or do you have it like
No.
bus 50 is for like the vocals going to that plate reverb, and then bus 51 is the same settings as bus 50, but
Well, it could
only
be
the
either
instruments go
way.
to
It
it.
kind of depends on the
Okay.
mix. Yeah. I don't always duplicate the settings and use it differently with different instruments because I don't always have to, and it's just like the way I'm used to mixing. But Uh, y sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. Kind of 50/50, but yeah, it could be the same bus that it's like an auxiliary bus, and there's a reverb plugin on it, and I'm sending it from the lead vocal, and I'm sending it from the acoustic guitars, and I'm sending, I don't know, the mandolin, whatever. They're all going to that in various amounts, and then if you solo that auxiliary bus, you'll hear a bunch of vocal reverb and then a little bit of those other reverbs. Um,
Gotcha.
but it could also be in two separate auxiliaries that are playing that have the exact same settings.
Yeah. Mine for me, like I always go to separate ones. Like I always have
I
like
know
I have a
you
separate one
you're you're
for
you're you're doing much cleaner, like kind of pop mixes than I am, and
well,
it's
it's
more necessary probably
yeah.
for the stuff that you're doing.
Well, I would say it's less about having it be a clean pop mix. It's more that I want
Control,
control to
yeah,
be able to have a moment where I can like hard mute all of the instruments and the
totally.
vocal reverbs are able to still continue, but the instrumental reverbs are muted. which I can't do because like you can try to like stop sending them preemptively, and it's just like a
Yes.
weird,
And
weird
that's
thing.
something that
But
you
it's
do all the time, and that's something that
yeah,
doesn't come up very often in the music I'm
oh
working on.
yeah, like every
Yeah.
mix that happens at some point. Like I'm being very. I do a lot of automation on my like FX buses,
Yeah, no, I know.
just
I know
volume
that about you,
automation.
and I'm just saying,
Yeah,
like, for me, that's like 1 out of 15 mixes
mhm,
that happens. So,
yeah,
but just because
and
of the
it's like
styles of music we're working
yeah,
on.
yeah, and for me it's like 16 out of 15.
Yeah,
I'm doing
exactly.
that. Yeah,
Perfect. Anyways, but yes, but the point is less the technicality of how I'm doing it, and more the point of just like finding a space for the mix and having the vocal and some other instruments live in that same space can really help things jive and mesh together. And
yeah,
I'm a big blender of reverbs. I like to use a lot, like a bunch of different reverbs to get a amalgamation that has like the right space for the song. And it also reverb will like, yeah, it just like affects like it's an effect, obviously. So
yeah,
it affects like the emotion of the vocal, and it also places it in that space of the mix. And I find that I just like have a lot of success using multiple reverbs to do that.
yeah,
And I have a lot of success of sharing of like, some instruments sharing reverbs with the vocal to get it all to mix together. And that, usually the drums are not going to any of those kinds of reverbs, right? Like, but often a piano or a guitar or, some other accompanying instrument will. And
yeah.
but also the vocal will have more reverbs that they're not going to.
Yeah, I just as you were saying that, it reminded me to add a song to the Secret Sonics
I was so on
in
top of it and I
playlist.
lost it this week. We need to add more
I need to
songs.
add more. I added a couple, but this one I was gonna say like we're talking about using different reverbs. I think still the artist that I feel is like a masterclass in reverb every time I listen to them is Vampire Weekend.
Hmm.
And they have some songs where just like the use of reverb and the use of different reverbs to just create these interesting characters for each of the tracks, it is unreal. So Yahe is the one that I just added to the playlist now. It's there are some moments that are just so big and reverby, and then some parts that are so like uncomfortably dry that even the contrast between them creates this like I don't know, like almost like a hostage note where it's like you know what I mean, like the different like cutout letters from a magazine or like a kidnapper would send. Not a hostage note, like yeah, like a like some kind of like kidnapper note, but like in a really good way. And so it's kidnapping, but for the greater good of music.
Hmm.
And I I'm always fascinated by listening to their music in headphones because number one, like the songwriting is always so weird and so memorable and catchy despite how weird it is. But their use of space is always something that continues to fascinate me. So I would recommend definitely listen to Yahe by Vampire Weekend in your monitors or in really great headphones because it is just a it's an experience.
I have to say, uh, I'm gonna like, I don't know what I'm about to do, but I will say that I have never gotten into Vampire Weekend because I found that the use of reverb, while cool, made it feel less emotional. I felt like there was an emotional disconnect inside of Vampire Music Weekend's music for me because it felt like they were just using things as an effect as instead of like they were using it too much almost. And even if they're doing it really well, which they are, like it feels like it takes away from whatever songwriting is underneath it. You know what I mean? They've actually lost me from their reverb, which is like the opposite of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Which is really funny. And there's other artists that I've lost me because of reverb. Actually, I'm thinking
Yeah.
of Fleet Foxes, like their first record, which is like should be an amazing record I should love, but it's like the same reverb on the whole record, and it's so wet, and I just like I can't listen to this anymore. Like it's
Yeah.
taking away from whatever else is happening here. So I'm like I'm not opposed to using a lot of reverb sometimes, but it shouldn't be for me like it could be really cool in one spot in a song, but if a
Mhm.
whole song has a lot of reverb and they're using it to kind of they're almost like leaning on it, I lose it because
Yeah.
it no longer talks to me on an emotional level, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two things. I'd say number one, I think it's just a difference between using reverb to create a sense of space and using reverb to create a sense of character.
Yeah.
And we both just like, and it's like not that one is like objectively right or
No,
wrong.
100%. Of
It's
course
just that
not.
like, yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
especially if you think about even the styles of music that we work on, like you tend to lean more towards the acoustically driven, like natural instruments in a space. And for me, I'm into like weird sound design things. So like, of course it makes sense that I'm going to be drawn to some of the like the same aspects that you actually are pushed away by.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, first thing is that there's no objectively right or wrong. But the second thing is,
This is also such a tangent from what we should be talking
oh
about.
no, we're talking about
Yeah.
vocal reverb and how it's in the mix. So this is like perfectly
Okay,
aligned.
cool.
Yeah, we're just like this is spot on. So yeah, number one, there's no
I like how
objective.
much we disagree about this also. Like,
Yeah, well, that's what I'm going to say is like number one, there's no objective right or wrong about if the reverb is right or not. But number two, there's one exception, and it is that you are wrong and you're an idiot, and I hate you.
wow.
I'm kidding, Ben.
I know
But
you're kidding.
but how often do we disagree on something? That's crazy.
We
but
always have different approaches and we always
Yeah.
have different thoughts. But like,
Yeah.
it's interesting that really drew you in and that really like turned me off.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I'm glad we found that. That's a really good way of thinking, like of trying to describe the difference in what is
Yeah.
what draws me in versus what draws you in.
Yeah, they're a band I
Yeah.
literally I tried to like and it repelled me actually, which is super weird. And like they should be a band I like, like in theory. But I don't know. That's me.
Yeah,
But
well, it was nice being your co-host. Appreciate this time we spent together.
oh my god. That's amazing.
No, but no. Okay, so I kind of feel like this is a good place to end today. Not in a good place to end our friendship, but in a good place to end the episode. No, I think that's awesome, and I think what I would say is if you're listening to this, if you're still listening to this, let us know what are some of the songs that you think have really great uses of vocal space. It doesn't have to be reverb on the on the whole. It doesn't have to be reverb specifically, but like what are some examples of songs where you feel like the vocals really just are done so perfectly well in the mix, and maybe some examples of songs that you really don't like how the vocals are treated.
Yeah, and I'm gonna add I know I'm such a Radiohead fan, and it's like so obvious, but I'm gonna add a Radiohead song to the list now, like exit music for a film.
Mm.
Like that is the perfect space for a vocal to live in for me. I don't know. So I'm gonna add it to our list, so people can have a listen to what Ben likes and what Ben detests, and what Carl likes and probably also likes.
I was gonna say, I was like, I want to be spiteful, and I want to pretend that I don't love that song, and that
nobody hates like Kid It,
yeah.
Okay, computer. So
Yeah, I can't.
it's hard to hate it.
I can't even sarcastically pretend to hate it.
Yeah. Anyways,
but I can sarcastically pretend to hate you.
That's
and
good.
Say, and say, well, you know what? Bye, Ben.
I was waiting for like fuck you, goodbye.
Fuck you, goodbye.
Bye, Carl.
I love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.